Well, welcome to another episode of the Crowdfunding Nerds. On this episode, we cover the theme of change. We talk about adapting to change, meaningful education, dealing with criticism, retention and application, all in the context of helping you reach your crowdfunding goals. Let's get started.
Game begin.
Let's go.
I used to be a marketer like you until I took an arrow to the knee.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lowen, and I'm joined, as always, by Sean Bradford. Here we are talking about change on episode 150. So first of all, it's kind of cool that we made it to 150 episodes. That is almost 3 years of running this podcast.
We're still alive.
Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, it is pretty cool. I mean, you know, we do have people that write us every week that just say that they love the podcast and that they're avid listeners and that kind of thing. And so, you know, if those people are certain to listen to this podcast, we appreciate you. We really appreciate you for letting us know that, and also for, you know, giving us all the ratings and all the sharing on social media. And, you know, it's made a big difference to us. So we really appreciate you. So now let's just jump into the subject of this podcast, which is change. And change is not very easy. More like this. I mean, it's easy to change your favorite restaurant. It's easy to change, you know, I don't know. I think it's impossible to change if you like pineapple on pizza or not. But I think that there are certain things that are just not very important. Maybe a good way to frame this is meaningful change. How to affect meaningful change in your own life, in your business, in your, I don't know, game design, in your whatever it is, crowdfunding. How and that's really maybe what we're going to talk about is partially philosophical, but I think that most of what we're going to talk about is where the rubber meets the road and why change is so hard. So let's talk about why change is important. Sean, how would you address that? Why is change important?
Well, I think change is needful when you encounter new information. So change is really an element of education. And I think maybe one disadvantage of academia, it almost teaches that once you get your degree, once you come get your doctorate, there you're educated now. When I think education is a continual process, something you have to do daily, something you always have to because things are always changing and you always need to adapt to those changes around you. You do that through educating yourself continually. So understanding processes, understanding technological developments, you know, chat GBT and AI has kind of exploded. So that's a new area where people can start investigating. How can I utilize this? How does this damage certain industries or damage my business or whatever? Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably the key. It's trying to get into a frame of mind in which you're always learning and willing to learn. I think one of the biggest barriers to change is the belief or the wrong belief that you already know, and you're unwilling to at least consider another possibility, another outcome. There are limits to this. There are some things which are simply absurd. You don't need to consider them too much. But I think when it comes to changing a process or changing a behavior or something of this nature, then it becomes important to... I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, I'll say you made me think of two things. The first one is that
coffee. That's why.
Yes, 1 cup of coffee behind.
That's it.
So I think that the one super duper important area that I would want to address in this, why is change important, is that your business can die if you do not change. Adaptation is why businesses survive. That's why Kmart used to dominate Walmart, and it no longer. I mean, I think it exists still. Toys R Us used to be the dominant toy store in the United States, and it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, Amazon dominates, and 80% of all e-commerce sales begin on Amazon. E-commerce wasn't a thing 30 years ago. And so we've got a lot of different examples of industries changing. And, the board game industry, really anything that required shipping went through a really catastrophic temporary change. And I think that a business owner's ability to adapt is why they will survive. I think about in terms of like battlefield tactics. You can be the greatest tactician. I mean, I'll use myself as an example. I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. If somebody said, I want to fight you, and they raised their fist at me, it would be like a fun thing. It wouldn't probably be that hard to deal with. But if they surprised me, that's a totally different set of skills. That actually relates less to my personal capability as a fighter and more about my skill set as a tactician, which can be quite different. Just simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A lot of the time, we'll say at the tactical level, you understand that you should not walk down a dark alley, that you would be an idiot for going out in certain places of town at night and that kind of thing. And so it's very possible to be very book smart and very street stupid. And also you've got a lot of people, very successful business people that are not book smart, that were not formally trained and yet do very well because they are quite street smart. And so I think that your capacity for understanding tactical changes at the we'll say like at the highest levels, kind of the 30,000 foot view of your company and of what is happening around you and how it's going to affect your business in the future. Really, how you prepare for those changes is what will determine if you thrive, if you crumble, and that sort of thing. And in the board game industry in particular, we're no strangers to seeing companies crumble because they were unable to adapt in one way or another. Now, there may have been other problems and whatnot, but I'd say that's pretty, undeniable at this point.
Yeah, an example that comes to my mind is Blockbuster. And in Ireland, there's a similar company called Extravision, where it had, rentals, DVDs or VHS tapes back in the day. And really, they should have been the forefront of online streaming and rentals digitally, but they dropped the ball. They failed to change with the times, thinking that maybe that this business model would last forever, and well, it didn't. So I think there's an example of companies failing to adjust and pivot depending on technological developments and understanding the needs of your customer base and then trying to meet that. Mm-hmm. Sun Tzu in The Art of War says, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you will not need to fear. You need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Wow. So that helps in your board game strategy, but it also helps in business. So understand your environment, your threats to your business, and being able to address them. Yeah, and knowing your strengths and weaknesses as a business as well is also important.
I find that one of so the internet is very famous for arguing about everything, and
it's not.
Damn it, Sean. So what I find is very useful when you have a position, a hardline position. I see many people, of course, in politics or in religion or the big things that really can divide people. You have people who very passionately argue for one side or the other. I find in most cases that these people are unable to articulate their opponent's points and better than the opponent can. And I think that in some cases you have people that actually are well studied on the opponent's point of view. And I remember I took a class in college. It was a speech and debate class. And we were given this exercise to argue for something that you do not believe and be compelling. If you believe the exact opposite, come up with a compelling argument for the opposite side. And I found that to be very, very cool because it forced me to research the legitimacy of the points that the other side holds, and it also gave me ammunition when it comes to somebody making a point like that. I know exactly why that doesn't work, or I know why that's wrong, or whatever, because I have studied deeply. I think that it's very important to study an opposing view. And of course, politics, religion, and all of the big things aside, it's really important to study people that run their business differently than yours. Why does it work for them? And if you run things your way, chances are that you're likely quite inexperienced. As if you're using crowdfunding and you're not, Jeff Bezos, then you probably should spend time looking at others' businesses. But if you don't, I would argue that your capacity to change is limited. Like iRobot, my capacity for answers is limited. My responses are limited. Anyway.
Yeah, I think a lot of the inability to change comes down to pride. I think this is what I was sort of tagging into before, is that it can not always feel good when you realize what you're doing is not working, or even listening to someone who says that what you're doing is not working, and then be able to take that on board and then change. Especially if it's something that is quite personal and close to you that you spend a lot of time with, or you take very personally, like your board game design. It can be very difficult to hear critical feedback and then take it on board without it feeling personal. So I think having humility or trying to be as humble as possible. So I'm not God. I don't know everything, and other people can certainly have input. And I even try this with clients. A lot of people hire us because we have expertise in marketing, but I never want to disregard someone's view or opinion. And I always want to take it on board and seriously understand that, because there could be a possibility that they are approaching something at a different angle I haven't considered, or that they simply understand their product better than I do, whilst I have a more of an objective look coming in from an outsider's perspective, and I can maybe point out things that they don't see. But nevertheless, I always want to take on board other people's suggestions, and sometimes it's not always correct. But even if it isn't correct, by being willing to listen to it, it might spark an idea of another solution that you can then find an answer for. So I think just always trying to be humble and willing to listen to other views, even if it comes from someone who's a jerk, even if it comes from someone who
trolls
is not necessarily saying it in a very nice way. There could be an element of truth in it, and taking it on board anyway, I think that's just an element of your character. I think that has to be refined, because it doesn't come naturally. You really have to try to really love understanding and love knowledge, and then trying to implement it, no matter where it's coming from, even if it's from a jerk or something.
Yeah, it sounds like it's kind of a parable of the wise man and the fool, and there are so many parables like this that deal with the wise man and the fool. But I would say that there is no phrase that annoys me more than somebody saying, "I know that." To me, that tells me that person is not open to hearing alternative views, and they probably do not know that. They know a piece of that, and they're not interested in hearing the rest. And so, just as I try my best to act as a wise man to my clients, but and part of that is absolutely admitting I don't know everything. But when anybody says I know that, they are closing their mind off to knowing, or to gaining any knowledge. And I think that that's a huge barricade. And most of the time that I hear I know that, it's from people who are I don't want to put this so bluntly, but unsuccessful or not in a place of great success. And it's, I think, a symptom of small-minded thinking. So, and I wanted to address another thing you mentioned, like if I used the word trolling, you didn't, but when somebody rudely talks to you, and like I have trolls that I deal with on a regular basis for during my own advertising for deliverance and other things, And what I always try to do, and whenever, like in Kickstarter comments, whenever you have somebody trolling you, there may be a kernel of truth in what it is that they're saying that is a legitimate concern. And so what I try to do in my response to those people is I try to address the legitimate concern. For example, I have, we've got deliverance ads running. And one of the big things that people troll us on, because we found a lot of success from saying this is a quote unquote Christian fantasy RPG in a box. And people sometimes will post Christian fantasy. Isn't that saying the same thing? Or isn't that redundant or whatever, and they think that they're the first person who said that. And I'm a former pro gamer. Like, I really know how to troll people and I'm very good at it. And I do everything in my power not to use that superpower that I have. It's like I'm a super villain that just is holding it inside, like a Vulcan holding their emotions, like, inside. And I try to respond, like, in this particular example, I think that the kernel of truth is that, is this game going to push religion on me? And that's not illegitimate as a concern. That's a legitimate concern. And I try to address that. Sometimes, I try not to address that with every single person who writes that thing, like a copy pasted response, but try to make sure that any one of those comments that's getting traction has a response that addresses, is this game going to preach at you? And, or do you need to be a Christian in order to enjoy it? Which is kind of an extreme example, but that's what I'm dealing with day to day. So,
yeah, I try to live by a maxim: don't suffer fools. And it always reminds me of Gandalf. He says, I've not passed through fire and death to bandy crooked words with witless worms. Yeah. So I feel like I've been through too much in life to waste my time. So it does. I think what I also meant is that taking what people say on board, but not necessarily engaging with them. I think that's a different arena. I think you should only engage with people who are willing to understand. Some people have no desire in understanding anything. Mm-hmm. So really trying to reason with them is fruitless. So,
other times people just want to feel heard. It's not about what they're saying to you so much. Like, for example, in game design, when you put a prototype out on the table and people play it, and they're going to tell you what they thought. And maybe it was an old version of the prototype and you have the new version on the way that fixes a problem. And it's all about, like, their feedback is all about this one problem that's actually already fixed. You shouldn't really try to cut them off and say, actually, that problem is fixed. You should hear them, because people will appreciate being heard. And I think that there are some, the knowledge, the actual words communicated, they are only about 5% of total communication. The body language and the tonal inflection in someone's voice represents the rest of communication. And that's 57% for body language and whatever it is, 38% for tonal inflection, and then at least 5% for the actual words used, which is why email is a terrible way to resolve an argument, or social media for that matter. So I think that there are deeper, maybe purposes to communication beyond knowledge transfer. And, people are always searching for those physiological needs of safety and shelter and other things like that. Those physiological needs that far, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a very useful, I don't know about useful, but it's at least will add to your knowledge if you look it up. Physiological needs are the most basic of human needs. The need to be safe versus the need for clothing and that kind of thing, like, versus the need to feel approved of. That's not nearly as important, right? So I find that allowing people to feel heard and feel welcomed and that kind of thing is super important. And that's just, the people that do that, they could totally be saying dumb stuff. and you should still appreciate them and thank them for their feedback. That's probably the best line that I can give any game designer is thank you for your feedback, because it shuts people down and makes it and lets them know that you heard them and does not commit to making any changes. So, it's extremely useful.
As long as you don't say it sarcastically.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah. Watch your body language and vocal inflection.
Yeah. So Andrew, as we're talking about pivoting and changing, and we've incorporated this idea of education, constantly learning. I have a theory, and I will see if you agree or disagree with it. But I think if you want to become a better marketer or a better game designer, it is a mistake to only study marketing or game design. So, for example, I want to be a better game designer. You type into Google how to become a better game designer. First book that pops up, you buy it and read it. I'm sure that's going to be a useful book. But if that's all you do, I think you're shooting yourself short. Is that something you agree with, or would you have a different?
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that. I'm very much in agreement with that, because I'll say, for example, with deliverance, I study the Bible every day, and I try to know it. And that was a necessary component of me making a game that everybody loved, that used that lore base. And if I didn't have that understanding, I really couldn't do any justice to the lore base. It's kind of like the Rings of Power writers. They never read Lord of the Rings in their life, and never studied it, and didn't try to make a true adaptation of Lord. The rings. Well, the appendices that J.R.R. Tolkien used. They just didn't treat the elves like elves and other things like that. And the fans revolted. So their ability to create a great show, I think that it's actually a great show. In fact, I personally quite enjoyed the Rings of Power. But I see the point of everybody that was mad because they didn't treat it with the lore with respect, because they really didn't know the lore. And when I say no, I don't mean like head knowledge. I mean passionately, adamantly, engaged with the lore, trying to do their absolute best to replicate it. You can tell, so from the Lord, it's like there's a progression of downward sliding from the Lord of the Rings to the Hobbit to the Rings of Power. It's just like,
Stop. What's the next thing they could butcher?
So I do think that you must, or like, for example, let's use a totally random thing that I think you'll have a fun time with, survival. So, in a post-apocalyptic world, after everybody's nuked each other and there's a zombie apocalypse, how do you survive? You definitely should have food storage, or maybe guns, so that you can like take over someone's house that has food storage. I don't know. But you're probably not going to make it that far if you don't have any secondary skills, right? Like you should have, we're talking like game terms here. You should have some secondary skills. You should be good at bow hunting, or you should be good at like, maybe you should understand what plants are good to eat and which ones aren't, and whatever. And there are all of these different types of people can get together, formulate a new society. Someone knows how to grow crops. Someone else knows how to hunt, and someone else knows how to defend property and whatever. All of these skill sets are necessary, and they're not possible to gain like in one person. And so I personally feel like your secondary skill sets are extremely useful for your primary skill. And I think that, in fact, I'll go back to a quote that I've used in the past, like a long time ago. Elon Musk, and I believe it was his first wife or his third wife, one of his ex-wives, talked about his understanding of merchant services and the internet. That was really the catalyst for him to develop PayPal, which was his first big claim to fame. So PayPal and a bunch of other companies in the future that he developed, but that was the first one. And he wasn't the best at merchant services. He didn't have the most intricate knowledge of merchant services, of any person on the world. And he didn't have the most intricate knowledge of the internet of every person in the world. but he did have the most intricate knowledge of both of those subjects. He understood each of those subjects better than anyone else in the world understood each of those subjects. And he was able to combine them in an innovative way. And I think that developing secondary skills is really a catalyst for innovation.
Yeah, being friends with the folks at DARPA helps as well.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of innovation, also idea generation. I'll give an example. I've been studying how far do I want to go?
Yeah.
Just one example. I recently read a book on the Japanese biological weapons program in World War II. They've established this group called Unit 731. And in this book, it divulges that the Japanese had a plan during World War II to conduct a biological weapons operation on the United States, on the Western coast. And their goal was to use a submarine that would go all the way up to the west coast of the USA, come out of submersion, deploy a one-manned aircraft that would then fly over the western coast that would dispense fleas with plague. And this was a suicide mission. It was kamikaze, so there's no return flight. They decided not to do this. In the end, they didn't want to start a big biological chain reaction warfare with the USA. But nevertheless, reading this, I was like, oh, I didn't even know that technology existed in terms of having like a one-man aircraft that could be in a submarine. And if I was a game designer designing a strategy game with different units, like, I don't know, like a Command and Conquer type game, that would be a really cool unit in a game where there's a submarine, it emerges, it shoots a one-man plane, or it's a single plane that has a kamikaze mission that spreads plague. Like, that would be a really cool mechanic in a game. And that idea is actually based in real history. And I would have never thought of that concept if I hadn't read this book on history. So I think that's an example of, like, if you study things outside of the game design space, like history or even philosophy, economics, you might pick up ideas that you can implement in your game and produce thematic things which you would have never thought of yourself. So that's just an example, I think, of the strength of opening up your perspectives. If you want to get better at marketing, if you want to get better at game design, try read books on psychology, understand human behavior, read books on economics, read history books, and you might find something that you can compile together. I think another reason as well, the importance of reading books, because most people are going to be like, they're going to be lazy, right? They're just going to, first thing they're going to do, go to Google and they're going to type something in, and everybody gets a similar search. Everyone's going to have the similar video pop up. The people making those videos have probably done the same thing and are just compiling other people's ideas. But if you're able to find a book that is even out of print and has some kind of arcane knowledge that no one is really talking about, I think you would be able to find things that other people aren't thinking about, aren't talking about, and you'd then be able to bring that to your own work and have something really unique in the space. Whereas if you're just using the same tools that everybody else is using, you might not encounter any ideas which are really unique, especially how the internet works these days in terms of people creating content that gets clicks, and it's really about algorithm manipulation rather than finding what is useful and true for people. So I think finding ways of, I think this is the importance of reading books, and most people as well aren't going to put the time in to read a book. So that alone is going to give you some very valuable information, because a lot of people just don't want to invest the time to do the research themselves. They'd rather watch a 3-minute video on the Japanese and biological warfare rather than actually read a book on it. So,
and it better be cut really, really fast for ADD. It's crazy, but our generation, I mean, the modern, we'll say, like Gen Z, millennials, they're all kind of in the same boat, and then the next generation after them. We have the attention span of a goldfish, and that is, literally speaking, we have an attention span that is less than 9 seconds. So, which is not good. I mean, a goldfish loses its short-term memory every 9 or 10 seconds. So every time it swims around its little tank and sees the little castle or sees the bubbles come up from the treasure chest, it's like the first time it's ever seen that. And so that's why goldfish lead amazing lives, I guess. In fact, I want to say Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, or someone like that was like a very successful quarterback in the NFL. they said that success for them boiled down to having the memory of a goldfish, because they didn't want to remember the interception they threw the play before. They needed to remember that to actually make positive impact with the next play. And of course, the next, if you let your head trash kind of dictate what it is that you do, in the future, it's just going to cause it's going to be less, you're going to be less effective as a human. So to your point, there's somebody, Charlie Tremendous Jones, actually, he said something that I think I've heard repeated from a number of different places. I think the CEO of Google said this or something like it. But you will be the same person in 5 years as you are today, except for the people you meet and the books you read. And I'll take it one step further, and just, with other studies that I've read, they estimate that 95% of your thoughts from one day to the next are the exact same, which is crazy to think about. And I think that a lot of those thoughts are base thoughts, like I'm hungry or whatever. But the things you think about are 95% the same from day to day. You only have 5% of your thoughts are innovative from in a single day. And that is a pretty crazy statistic. How can a person like that affect change? How can a person like that ever change? Can you change, and the only way to do that is to have new thoughts, is to experience new ideas. And so I think that it's very important to read books and to have a new thought, maybe that you engage with that wasn't your own, but you're reading new information. That is guaranteed new information for you. And so I think that your capacity to change is limited by the fact that 95% of your thoughts are the same day to day. So in order to change them, you have to have new input, really. And so for me, I will also say that I think that just simply engaging with new material is not enough. Like if you read another book, even if it's a fantasy book, like I read, of course, Lord of the Rings. I've read the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson and his Stormlight Archive, and Brother Band Chronicles by Rick Riordan, and a million other series. The Wheel of Time by the guy who's really a pervert. And
Stephen King.
No. It's the guy who's, anyway. I say he's a pervert because of what all the stuff in Wheel of Time. But he passed away. Robert Jordan. And so anyway, all of these, they qualify as new because you're engaging with kind of new ways of I don't know, implementing magic systems and new ideas in regard to relationships and how the bad guy kind of interacts with the world and is revealed, and a million other creative things. But I think that just simply engaging with new material is not enough. I put it this way: you have to do heavy gravity training. If you want to engage with new material, you've got to do like heavy gravity training, like Goku. You've got to be purposeful with your reading. You've got to read in order to explore new ideas. You can't just read for pure entertainment. And I think there's nothing wrong for reading to, let's say, take a load off. I know a lot of people relax with reading, and they just, or listen to an audiobook, and they come in and they like zone in and out, and they're, have you ever had the experience where you're reading, like I read the entire Harry Potter series in like 2 weeks. Have you ever had the experience where you read, like when you get like really into a book series and you read, and then like all of a sudden you realize like, I don't know what's been going on for the last 3 pages. It's like your brain just like forgets.
Your brain just turns off.
Yeah. And you need to go back and you're like, oh, what? That happened. And it's like, I have no idea why we're here. So I think that it's to be purposeful with your study is going to be much more useful. And I'm going to use an example that I have craved to use on this podcast since we started. And that's World of Warcraft. So I was at one time I was ranked 7th in arena in the United States and 33rd in the world for MMR. And I did this in 2v2 and with a partner who eventually went on after me and placed 3rd at BlizzCon. At the second BlizzCon tournament. Yeah, he heck carried me. It was amazing. So his name is Ice Fox, but a little frost mage. But anyway, the practice, like we would practice hard, and we would practice at a very at scheduled times, and we wouldn't practice all day, but we would practice 5 days a week for like 1 hour or 2 hours, just whatever we were able to give. And my wife, who was at the time my girlfriend, will tell you that I would cut dates short to get there. And she, not good, not healthy for the long term. So I don't actually play World of Warcraft anymore. But actually, she got into WoW because of me. And we had a lot of fun together. But the concept is that if I played Arena like all day and Battlegrounds and stuff like that, I mean, I loved poning noobs. And it was super fun. I played a rogue and I was very, very good. But I only became, I'll say, great when I focused and put time in. And what that involved was playing at high level against all the players that knew not to be noobs, like all the ways not to be noobs. I had to be very, like, my timing had to be perfect, and my, the adaptation just reached a new level. And it wasn't just because I played those players, but it was because when we played and we won or we lost, we analyzed what we did and how we could improve and what we're going to do differently next time. And we critically thought in between every single one of our matches and during the match. And I think that critical thinking is what I mean when I say heavy gravity training. So whenever you raid, you've got to do it on purpose with intent and, with intent to learn. And I think that maybe another example is I took this business course for how to sell stuff a long time ago when I just started my business. And I actually had a business that I was trying to sell websites at the time, and which eventually kind of morphed into Next Level Web and Crowdfunding Nerds. And I was able to take a class and then work on applying that stuff over the course of that week. And then the next week we would have the next class, and I would work on applying the new information over the next week. And I would find that I couldn't apply everything, but I could apply at least one thing. I could try to do one thing and try to, better myself in that one way. And I think that the application was the only reason that class was incredible for me. And in fact, that class was taught by Dan Bow, who was on this podcast. He had a 2-part episode. Absolutely incredible master of sales, because you want to buy stuff from him. He's just an incredible teacher. But if I were to take the class and just gain the information and not apply it, then that is, I would say that's, I'm not doing it on purpose. I'm letting it happen to me. And my intent is not to better myself. My intent is to just kind of sit back and gain all the information. And you can't wait until you have all the information before you make moves. Right. So.
Yeah, I think what you're saying in being intentional is key, because even when it comes to retention, I always make a note to make notes whenever I read something interesting. I have basically a system of documentation. And the reason why I document it is because it's always my intention to teach others what I've learned. And this really helps me retain the information. So my poor wife probably gets the brunt of this. I will read something interesting and then she will hear me talk about it. And I do sincerely want her to understand something that I found interesting, but there's also a selfish element to it where I know that if I communicate this to somebody else, it's going to strengthen my ability to remember it. So I think having that practical approach is certainly going to help. And this can be done in our Crowdfunding Nerds community. You find something interesting about game design, go to the Crowdfunding Nerds community, make a post. And yes, you can help the community, but you'll also be strengthening your own ability to remember the information that you've just processed. So
in fact, there's a stat that says if you hear information, you'll retain 10% of it. But if you teach information, you will retain 90% of what you teach, which is I think just fantastic.
So, Andrew, I'm going to make an assertion. Tell me if you agree with it, disagree with it, or otherwise. Is it better? Let's say we have someone who is a chess champion. Is it better to have someone who is a chess champion? They've played chess competitively. They know this one game super in depth, or is it better to have someone who is maybe a casual board game player who has played lots of different games, but has never really gone into too much depth of them? So what I'm essentially asking is depth better than spread? What are your thoughts?
So I think that there's an argument to be made that in that particular case, that spread is better than depth, because you need to know what exists out there, what other things exist. So if the chess champion were to design a game, they're going to make chess but better. That's what's going to happen, right? And that, I think, is where most of the games that are really truly not innovative exist, or where they come from, where they're like, I'm going to make Monopoly but different. I'm going to make Catan but different. I'm going to make whatever it is, Magic the Gathering but better. I'm going to make Warhammer but better. And they end up making a version that people are like, well, why wouldn't I just play Warhammer? Or why wouldn't I just play chess, right? Like, let's make 3D chess. Let's do chess on a diamond-shaped board instead of square, right? And so, however, when you have somebody who has, let's say everybody has a spread of knowledge. Say you're Magnus Carlsen and your friend showed you, I don't know, Catan, and then your next buddy showed, I'm sure Magnus Carlsen has played board games because he's from Norway, right? Isn't he Norwegian? I don't know.
German.
Sorry for, no, I know anyway, he's Nordic. He looks kind of like a well-shaped Viking. But dude is extremely gifted in chess. He works really hard. He has a mind for it, and he's just dominating the world scene at the moment.
Norwegian.
Incredible. Yeah. Oh, yes, I got it. So he is probably the best example of somebody who has a depth of understanding in chess. But if you also give him a spread of understanding of the various games, the things that are possible in games, I think that somebody with a depth of understanding in one could apply some incredible innovation to, for example, a game like Catan, where if you understood Catan and you were extremely knowledgeable in chess, you could understand these intricate, you could modify Catan in an intricately subtle way because you are such an expert on chess, and you could make it feel like Catan and chess, had a baby, and it's awesome. So I think that it's the answer to your question. I would say I do believe that depth is more valuable than spread. Because depth is so much harder to achieve, whereas spread is a lot easier to achieve, but it's a lot harder to actually pull information from one play of Catan or whatever. Let's just say if you get, or like Radlands, like it's a game that I love that you hate, and I actually have it on my desk right now to my left. Radlands is a game that you can just totally get obliterated and have no chance. Star Realms is kind of the same way, where some games just do not work out very well for you and you're going to lose them. You should lose them. And other games you're guaranteed to win, and other games you actually can impact your, the majority of games, I'll say, you can impact your likelihood to win. And skill is a true factor in, all the games in the middle, like 70% of your games that you play. It will determine win or loss by skill. And I think that a game like that is, and my mind is like, is now fading. I'm trying to make sure that it's, I could play that one time and you could play it one time. I had a great first game. It's like, wow, it was so close. My wife and I played and she almost beat me and I pulled out the win at the last second. And then you could have a game where you just got steamrolled because you got these really weak bases, and maybe your wife got some really epic cards that you just didn't have the ability to deal with because it just so happened that you had the wrong combination of cards in your hand to deal with her strategy. And we could pull two widely different conclusions from our plays of that game. And that's why I think that spread can be dangerous. That's where people like, oh, Badlands sucks, or Scythe is the best game in the world, or whatever. After one play, it's because maybe I won the first time I ever played Scythe, or maybe I got dominated when I played Badlands for the first time. And so I guess that would be my answer to that. Hopefully it makes sense.
So you basically said both. That's cheating.
I know. But I will say that I do prioritize depth over spread.
I was always the type to go in deep. I think there's probably about 4 or 5 games I played growing up that I spent a lot of time in. I wasn't the type to really spread too far. Mm-hmm. I think Shelfside do a great breakdown of Radlands. If anybody wants to see that, I think they do a pretty good review of some of its issues that I tend to agree with.
It's pretty entertaining too. So then there are a couple of things I had left, and we're kind of coming into the end of our podcast. But I want to say that I hate change. I personally hate it, and I know that I'm not alone. People that are listening to this absolutely. If you resonate with me, I hate change. I think it's hard. It's uncomfortable. The idea of changing into, from coal into a diamond, it takes pain. It takes, pressure. It takes heat, and it probably sucks. I don't know what rocks feel or anything, but it's painful. But that diamond is worth a lot, while the coal is worth nothing. It's all about the process that changes the diamond into something that is worth something, or the coal into something that's worth. So I think that forming new habits and breaking old habits in particular is probably the reason that I hate change, because I like doing it the way that I'm used to. And, from something as simple as bookkeeping, when I ran my own small business, everything, by myself, I was kind of a freelancer. I had the ability to just look at my checking account, make sure there was enough money in there for me to pay my bills, and try to hustle to make sales and other things like that, so money would come in the future. And I really did not go into any depth in bookkeeping. I'm like, let's try not to make, unnecessary expenditures, and let's try to make money. And is the bank account greater than zero? Great. I could not run the business today like that. We've got 6 employees that now rely on us to be profitable and all of that. And I have a bookkeeper, I have a CPA, I have, with the Deliverance publishing, Low End Games is a publishing business. We've got accrual basis accounting and other things like that. And that stuff's really uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels like it's like, like Brian Tracy's book, Eat That Frog. Mm-hmm. We actually discussed a ton of business books. We'll include the podcast episodes in the show notes, but it really felt like a frog, because it was, like eating a frog. I don't like to eat frogs, but and that's the whole concept, is that the hardest thing you have to do that day is the frog that you have to eat first. Eat the frog on your plate, and then you can eat the good stuff that you like. If you eat the frog first, then the rest of the day, that difficult task that you complete early is going to allow the rest of the day to become much easier. Mm-hmm. And so I think that breaking an old habit is a lot like eating a frog, for me. I don't know how to feel like that. So the last thing that, that we have is, we made some changes personally to our Crowdfunding Nerds podcast, and you probably heard them at the beginning of this episode. We're advancing, we're growing, our listener base is increasing, and we want to do things that are going to kind of keep us with the times. When we started, it was just, let's go off the cuff. Let's talk about a topic and that kind of thing. And I found it difficult to sometimes maintain control of where our conversation went. And we would have large swaths of segment that would be removed, that Sean would have to remove. Well, we're growing in our business, and now Sean, actually, as of episode 149, Sean no longer cuts the podcast. We have a company that helps us cut up the podcast, Diff Mix Audio Productions, and with Eric and Amber Beals. Thank you guys, by the way. And they advised us, hey, you've got 150 episodes now, and you have a mature audience that's used to listening to you guys. They probably skip your intro, and why not change it? And so we have now this new format, which is going to generally be Sean introducing the episode at the beginning, followed by what we call a bumper, which is like a 5-second or so intro music that is short enough that nobody would care to skip. And then we dive right into the topic, so that the beginning of the episode frames the topic for everybody, and then we get right into the content. Rather than you guys hearing the same thing that you've heard a bunch, it's just going to be unique content. And took us a little while to get there, but I think that the change over in the long term is going to be really good for everybody, because that way it's going to frame what it is that you guys can expect from the episode. And I think in the end, it's going to result in longer retention and listenership. And it's going to just, in the end, it's just going to help more people. It's going to help you guys even more. So, but before we go, I would love to hear from you guys in our Crowdfunding Nerds community on Facebook. What changes have you guys made to your businesses or to your game design or whatever it is that has been extremely impactful? And what habit did you have to break? What new habit did you have to form? Really curious about that. Join our Crowdfunding Nerds community on Facebook. We're going to pin a post for this episode. It's episode 150. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. If there's anything that is meaningful, that has made a difference in your business career or journey, your crowdfunding journey, all of that, I think that our members would find that really, really useful. And so go ahead and do that. You can search for Crowdfunding Nerds community on Facebook, and it'll also be in the show notes. So that is the conclusion of this podcast. We're just going to let Robot Richard send us on out like he always does. We're not changing that. And so, Robot, energize.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.